This is a C# console application that demonstrates the use of methods after getting some input from the user. So this program has really two methods. One is a value returning method and the other a void method. The method that's designed to calculate the user's maximum heart rate after they enter their age, and then the other method is designed to calculate the user's recommended heart rate range during exercise. So that makes the application a bit interesting. Again, one method is just void and the other one is value returning. So let's demonstrate the application and then we'll look at the code. So we're going to run this console app in debug mode, and I'm just going to put an age. So age would be 45. So it just says based on the age you entered, 45, your maximum heart rate is 175 beats per minute. And you'll see that that's a calculated value. And then once it has the maximum heart rate, it's then going to calculate the target heart rate, which should be between 55 and 85% of the max heart rate if the person exercises 20 to 30 minutes. And so the recommended lower heart rate, which would be the 55%, is 96.25 beats per minute, whereas the recommended upper target heart rate is 85% or 148.75, 85% of the maximum heart rate. And so that's what the program does. So let's take a look at the code. And so again, I always recommend that you add the appropriate comments to the top of your code, the author, the date the code was written, and a brief description about the application. This is just a console application, so it only needs the system objects available in the .NET framework. So let's get right to the main method here. And here we're just writing out to the console to collect input, where we're asking the user to enter their age, and it has to be between 18 and 100 years old. So this thing will only calculate adults. If the user does not put an age between this, we need to handle that. So we have our try catch block, and let's take a look. So here we're just getting the input that the user provides and storing it in a string variable called input, and then we quickly parse that out as an integer and store it in the value of input variable. We're then going to test to see if the input provided an age between 18 and 100, and if they did, the code is very simple here. First, what we're going to do is we're going to execute our value returning method called max heart rate. We'll take a look at that here in just a moment. And because it's a return method, it's going to provide the value of the max heart rate and store that in the get max heart rate integer variable here that's inside this block of code. Once we get our max heart rate, we will then pass that as a parameter to the recommend exercise method, where we will display the recommended target heart rates. So let's start first with examining the max heart rate. So in this line of code, we are passing the value of the user input, which would be their age. And we're going to pass that in order to a method we call max heart rate. So let's come down, and you'll see that outside of the main method, here's the end of my main method, this curly brace. Outside of that, I have a method that I've written here called max heart rate. Now, when we look at the header portion of this method, you'll see that we must declare how this method can be accessed. In this case, it is a privately accessed method. which means that the method is limited to this containing class. We also have this static declaration here, which basically just says that this method is not instantiated using the keyword new, and you'll see that more when we get more into the object-oriented techniques where we instantiate objects in memory. So we just use this method without instantiating an instance of it. Notice that the naming convention here is a capital letter in the beginning of the name of the method. So instead of having a small letter in M in max heart rate, I just put capital letters, and this is the typical naming convention of a method. And because I have int here, a data type, this indicates that it is a value returning method. And it's further enforces that it's a value return method with this keyword return inside of the method itself. Also, I have here in my parens that I'm going to pass a parameter within this method, and it will accept an integer value that I'm going to call getAge. So up here in my if condition, you'll see that in max heart rate, I passed the value the user entered in as their age right here. So that argument becomes used as a parameter here, and it gets renamed getAge. And then getAge is accessible, the value the user entered, within the body of the method. And so here inside the max heart rate method, I have a formula for calculating the max heart rate, which is essentially 220 minus the age. And we know the age is stored here in getAge. So I have another variable called calculate max heart rate that stores integers. And all I do is give it the value of 220 minus whatever the user entered in as their age. And then I just write that out to the console, and I return the value in the calculate max heart rate through this method. So the value that is returned here through the execution of that method gets assigned get max heart rate. Now, since I have the max heart rate that was calculated by the method, which was 220 minus the age, I then pass that as a parameter here inside the recommend exercise method. So let's go down to the recommend exercise method. And again, it sits out on its own. So in scope, methods should be outside of other methods. They don't go within. So they sort of sit here on their own. And this is the beginning and end of the method. Now this one, the accessor is private. It is static, so we don't create any instantiations of this method. We just execute it within the class. But notice here we have void. Void essentially means that the method is just going to execute and that's it. There's no expectation of return of any value. It just runs and then completes. And it accepts here a parameter, which would be an integer value. And remember, what we're doing here is we're passing up here, we're passing the value that was calculated as the max heart rate. We pass that into this recommend exercise method. So we then rename that variable here, integer data type, to get heart rate. Inside that, we can then provide two variables that calculate the lower target heart rate and the upper target heart rate. The lower target heart rate is equivalent to essentially 55% of the max heart rate. And the upper target heart rate is 85% of the maximum heart rate. So we want essentially when the user is exercising, we want them exercising between 55 and 85% of their max heart rate. So we store those values in these two variables. And then we just display those out in the application, and then the application ends. So that's what we have. And then once this method finishes executing, it returns to what's called the return point in the application. So again, after this method was executed, it went down, executed the method below, and then the return point came right back to this line of code and continued along. So once the recommend exercise method executes, it comes back to this return point, and at that point the application ends. If the user does not enter an age between right here 18 and 100, then the program simply says please enter an integer value between those two, between that range of 18 and 100. Otherwise, if they give us horrible data, then the catch block will come into play and inform the user that they need to enter an integer value for the age. And that completes an example of a C# console application which demonstrates the use of methods after getting input from a user.